Hey, what's up, guys? It's me, Rivstar here, and today we're going to be talking about the Secret Hitler 4th tournament overview, really. We're just going to be talking about everything that's happened, like the final positions, who was expected to be winning the draft, and then how some individual players have performed, the management, the team management that's been happening or not happening in some cases, and then we're going to be talking about a few of my opinions at the end. So to start off with, I've got the draft up recorded. I've muted this because the audio is on, but I will obviously not be using any of that audio as that is not allowed, and it would be unfair to publish people's audio when they don't want it to. So unfortunately, I was a bit sloppy with the recording of this draft, so I think for a good couple of minutes I just have this screen open instead of the actual draft position. So it actually takes about 2 minutes for us to get to maybe 4. Oh wow, it really took a while. There we go. So we finally get into the draft. It's about 8 minutes in. So let's just take a quick overview of the draft at the start. So I believe Jeb had the very first pick of the tournament, and he chose to pick Mello, which is Wanda. Now, that's a very interesting pick because he's basically stating that he thinks Mello is the best player in Secret Hitler right now that was on this roster, which is quite interesting. At least that's how you should be drafting people, right? You should always want the best player first. However, Jeb himself did say he was basically drafting people who were active pretty much and relatively good. So that was his main requirement, being active. And I guess it's fair to say Mello is probably one of the most active people out of the top drafts, I guess. So, I mean, it makes sense, I guess. It's definitely an interesting way of drafting people. But, yeah, so he chose to do that. Although then he sort of contradicts that underneath by drafting Ark quite high up. I don't think Ark's very active. I might be wrong. He might have some alts that I don't know about, but as far as I know, Ark is not a very active player unless he plays on like Shiro or one of them accounts. I think then he might be a bit active. But anyway, yeah, so Wanda got drafted very first of this entire tourney by Jeb. And then we move on to Acro's drafts. Now, I think Acro just drafted. I'm not sure what actually happened, but I believe she drafted someone like 7 or something, and then they basically did the rest of the drafting for her. She wasn't paying much attention to the draft as far as I know. Don't quote me here because I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think Acro paid much attention to the draft or cared that much about it. And, well, that definitely showed in their performance. And you go on to Strombel's team. Now, Strombel's basically, I don't know how to say this without sounding condescending or something, but Strombel's basically only was a captain because Maxi dropped out. I think what I believe happened is Maxi wanted Strom to have a chance of being captain because they're good friends, so Maxi dropped out the captain race so that Strom could instead be a captain, which I think is quite a nice thing to do. And I obviously think, well, Strom's performance was pretty good this tourney, so obviously Strom definitely deserved to be a captain, so I don't see any problems there. Strom obviously drafted Maxi first. Again, was Maxi the strongest player? I don't think he was. Was 7 the strongest player? Obviously, I don't think 7 was either. But I think there's sort of a bias when you're drafting that you just want to draft your friends. Also, you are picking a vice captain. So I think in the case of Manu's team, obviously his draft was very first Flying Lizard, which is Tom. Now, he pretty much, I don't know. He probably drafted him specifically because he wanted him to be a vice captain, right? Manu didn't want to do much of the captainy work, so he knew if he drafted Tom, he would do most of it, is what I think I get out of that. Obviously, Tom was also probably not the strongest player at the time, but yeah, it's interesting for sure. So, yeah, the first picks were very interesting. I do believe of the people in the tourney, Andrew is probably the strongest player here. So it is interesting to see Andrew being drafted 4th and not first. I do think you have some people in the second row that are better than some of the people in the first row, which is quite interesting. So then you have, so yeah, you got Medusa just straight up going, is thinking, let's just draft the best players. So that's the way he drafted, I'm pretty sure, and obviously that worked well for him in the tourney. Manu just drafts someone for vice captain. Pingu drafts Ryan Lockwood, who is a strong player. Don't argue with that pick. And then Vice drafts Scorcher, which is an interesting pick. I don't know. I don't know who's actually left because I unfortunately don't have access to this at the time, so I can't move around or anything. But I think Scorcher is probably one of the best picks there. So yeah, I don't argue with that. Then we have Ark, who is again I'm not quite sure. Ark might be very active and I just don't know about it, but yeah. Then you have Envas drafted second, which is quite interesting because Envas has been very inactive recently. I don't think he's played any ranked games in the past several months, so I don't actually believe he should be that high up. But again, I don't also think seven. I think seven's Claire. I also think she's been very inactive, so I'm not quite sure about Acros drafting. I think Acros specifically just drafted people she knows and hasn't really paid much attention to anyone who's been playing recently. So then you have Strom drafting Bremen second. It's not bad, but obviously I think they were probably better picks. Not to diss them. Bremen's great. And then Medusa's a really interesting pick here. He picks Jimmy, which is Cast Dude, on round 2. Now, I think he could have probably gotten away with drafting him later, just because he was listed as like a 1600 elo or something. Obviously, not everyone knows who he is, and I think most people already had the drafts locked in. Like Manu's probably always getting Sale there, so I actually think Medusa could have probably drafted Sale or someone there and still maybe got Jimmy, but then he wouldn't have had Beyond, I guess. Yeah, he probably wouldn't have got Beyond, I guess, and Medusa and Beyond good friends. So anyway, yeah, the first draft's pretty standard, barring a few people. Again, overall, there's a bit of a theme with Acros draft is she did not draft very well, to put it bluntly, and Jeb drafted entirely based off activity, is what he said in his own words, I'm pretty sure, which is an interesting idea. It just didn't work. So there's nothing too spectacular about the draft so far. You have pretty normal teams so far. And then you have this here, which is some interesting drafts that are happening here. So also another thing that's interesting is Vice got some pretty solid players there, Scotch and Artsy. Then he gets Billy and Schlobby. Pretty much all of them are nearly 2k players. I think Billy's probably about 1900. Schlobby has a 2k account, but is probably about 1900 because he doesn't play much, as far as I know. So yeah, he has some pretty strong drafts, but the funny thing is he actually ends up picking Billy 49 for captain, vice captain I mean, instead of Scorcher or Artsy. I would probably have picked Artsy for vice captain if I was him, but I guess they did well this tournament, so it definitely worked. Now, here in this race, start to have some interesting things. Monty, definitely a strong player, that's not bad. And then you get me drafted in fucking round 4, which is quite interesting because obviously I don't think I shouldn't be that high. I think I should be at least round 5 or 6. But the reasoning that I was drafted this high is specifically because Medusa and Manu are sort of right next to each other in the draft, and they are sort of in direct competition here. They have a lot of the same picks that they want. So basically, if Manu doesn't draft me on round 4, Manu knows he's not going to be able to get me at all, because Medusa can either draft me on his turn, which was right next, or when it comes around here, I can be drafted on round 5 before Manu can even have a chance to draft me on round 5. Also, Jeb would have probably drafted me on one of his 2 picks if I wasn't picked by either of them. So that just sort of came down to a lot of people wanted me, I guess. So I sort of had to be drafted earlier. Then you have someone like Div next, who I'm not too sure about them. I don't think they're that good of a player. I think they're also drafted a bit too high, but I don't know them. Maybe they're a really old player that has some secret 2K account I don't know about. You never know. As far as I know, he's not a very good player though, which is an interesting 4th round pick. Again, it's interesting to see someone like Gabe being drafted. Gabe and Schlobby and Monty Java in the same round as like Fat Midget, Div and me. Even JDZA, he's probably about on tier with me, I guess, now. I'm not too sure. He's quite active, so that's not bad. Both of these are 2 good picks from Jeb. I actually think Jeb came out of rounds 4 and 5 the best because he just actually drafted some strong players. These 2 are actually active and really good at the game at the time. And then you can move on to Manu's draft, which starts to become a bit like problematic, really. He's drafted me and Perry in rounds 4 and 5. Neither of us are particularly like really high elo players. We both are, well, we're pretty much green farmers. So he's basically picked us both to play in regular games, and yet he's picked us on rounds 4 and 5, which is very interesting. Then you actually see another interesting thing, which is Yules being drafted in round 5. Now Yules is a 2K player. She is pretty good at the game as far as I know. However, her, as Star put it bluntly, her tournament stock is very much down after her losing all of her games last tourney. She's very unfortunate in these tourney games, I think. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty standard. You have Secret Lib being drafted slightly higher than they should be. I'll say that as well. I don't know Sidewalk. I'm pretty sure they play like Avalon or some other game. So I had no idea if they're actually good or not. I can't really comment about them. So yeah, then you go down this draft. Pepsi being drafted there's decent. Reich is decent. Fireclub's decent. Yeah, all of these are just decent picks. There's nothing wrong with the round 7 draft. And then you move on to here. You have Murtex, also decent. Rimatu, probably slightly higher. You know, I see a lot of people better than Rimatu that are lower down. 1-on-1, for example. Definitely a better player than Rimatu. So I'm trying not to be mean, but I'm sort of just trying to talk objectively here. So rounds 7 to 9, you see interesting things happen because some of the better players are actually drafted in much lower rounds. Ginger is probably better than Ripin and Chopin, but he's drafted round 9, which is also interesting. I've no idea who Insurgents is. I don't actually know them at all, but I think Electron. He also drafted Woody as well. I think Electron's better than Woody. So yeah, I think Manu's draft in the mid-tier sort of fell apart here. Like, I think it's fine to draft someone like maybe either me or Perry in an early round, but then you have sort of like 2 of us, and it's kind of iffy because you just have 2 people who are like not really able to play in the high-low or the special games, and then you're basically entirely relying on basically Manu, Tom and Sale for all the special games, because Vincer also doesn't really play them much, I don't think, or at least he didn't end up getting any of them. So yeah, Manu's draft didn't look particularly strong at the start. Jeb's also looked, well, by far the worst. Jeb actually drafted Kayvon specifically for card backs, which is amusing. Kayvon got drafted way higher than she probably normally would because she was promising card backs for whoever team she was joining in, which is definitely an interesting strategy. I don't knock it. And then yeah, I mean, at this point you just have a bunch of players after here who I probably don't really know, so can't give a good comment on really. Yeah, so I think after about round 11 you just get a bunch of people I don't really know. I will say Ant had a very strong tourney performance. He should have probably been drafted higher, because even before the tourney people should have known he was a good player. I think he's probably better than Humble Genius, to be fair, so I'd have probably drafted him earlier. Joyner, he's an interesting player. I think he sometimes performs really well, sometimes doesn't. Starsheep, also good pick, probably a bit late actually on Starsheep's pick. I think I'd have probably picked him slightly earlier. He had some interesting performances in the voice chat games, although it definitely was not bad. Hitler, obviously, I've already said early, very late, and left winger also had a very late drafting, considering he has nearly 6,000 games or something. He ends up getting picked in round 8. I know he's not been very active recently, but he is a really strong player, so he should have definitely been picked earlier. And there's just sort of a bunch of people that are all sort of the same caliber, I guess. You have, again, Kashi drafted there specifically because he's a mod, which is another interesting drafting thing he did, I guess. But other than that, he had Geo drafted earlier than Limo, which is also interesting because they should probably be swapped. I don't see anything else really interesting or spectacular about the rest of the draft. So yeah, from just looking at this point, I think it's fair to say these two teams, Team 1 and 2, Jeb and Acros team, were by far the worst drafted. And then you have Manu's team, who's probably the third worst based on drafts alone. And then you have these Team 3, 4, 6 and 7, which are all pretty good. I think Vice's team's probably a bit worse. Pingu's team was really stacked just because he has, 5 2K players? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. And then 2 1900 players. So Pingu's team is really stacked and looking like the favourite going into this tourney. Medusa's team also fairly stacked. Strom's team also fairly stacked. They have a lot of 1900 players. They don't have many 2K players though. Yeah. So it really did look like Pingu's team was the favourite to win this tournament, probably closely followed by Medusa, then Strom, then Vice, and then Manu's team, then maybe Acros and Jebs in either position. Neither of them were particularly strong, in my opinion. And then obviously you just have the rest of the draft, which I'm not going to lie, I do not know most of these people, so I'm not going to really comment about them. So yeah, that was probably it for the draft. So then we move on to the overall final positions of the tournament, which so unexpectedly for me resulted in Medusa winning 2 tourneys in a row. Now, I did think Pingu's team would probably win, but I did think Medusa could easily have this tournament in the bag, which he did end up having. So he won by a massive lead. Look how far between it is. That's fucking 23 points or something in between them. In between first and second there. That's insane. Now, Pingu's team did really underperform this performance. This tourney, I mean. And unexpectedly, these two teams came last. What was interesting is Jeb's team, Please Clap, was actually leading the tournament at one point quite early on, which is very unexpected. But in the end, he did come last, which is definitely not unexpected based on his draft, which wasn't particularly strong in my opinion. So yeah, I think there's an interesting correlation sort of between the two weakest teams had objectively the weakest drafts. The strongest team had one of the best drafts, but then it sort of gets a bit iffy in the middle where you have just Pingu's team had some probably unfortunate games maybe, and Manu's team had some pretty good games, I guess, which actually ends up making the final standings having Manu's team in third. So yeah, that was the overall scores of it. And now we're going on to the individual players. So we have the personal scores and stats. So you have pretty much all of Jeb's team just completely flopped this tourney. Paz is their best player, going 3 for 4, getting 9 points, and that's the best player on the team, which is really unfortunate because that's not a very high score. So you did have both Mello and Jeb completely sort of flopping their tourney performances, I guess. Mello only won one game out of 5, which is actually very much linked with his performance right now on the site. He went from being like in the mid 2k section to being about in 1800 now. He is pretty much on a losing streak completely, and he's not doing very well right now in Secret Hitler at all. So that's just kind of unfortunate, I guess. You have 1-on-1 only getting 2 games, which is very interesting. Ark got 5 games, also completely sort of flopped. He only won 2. I have no idea what actually happened in any of these games. I have watched them all, but I obviously can't remember all 48 games. So I'm sorry if I'm saying something like, oh, this guy flopped and then most of the games were unwinnable. I don't know what actually happened. Again, both Carl only winning 1 out of 4 games. He also apparently did something wrong there. Botley did decently, went 2 for 2. JDZA did decently. Mertex also flopped. He got 4 games, only won 1. You have then Paz doing the best out of the team, yeah. So that's interesting. Nobody on their team got given 3 games. Everyone was 1, 2, or 4 or 5. I think it's interesting that Jeb gave himself 5 games. I personally if he was a regular player, he probably would have got 3. But because he's the captain, he can just put however many he wants in. I think that definitely hurt his team overall, but nothing else to say about Jeb's team, really. Then you move on to Acros Team, where you see a very different picture from their team and Jeb's team. They have a lot of high-performing players, but they also have a lot of low-performing players. Secret Ginger managed to go 0 for 4, which is a very poor performance. No idea what happened there, because Ginger's usually a pretty strong player. And then you have Star Matrix being only given 1 game, he won it. Then you have that guy giving, I don't even know who that person is, but they got 3 games and they only won 1. Secret Lib won 0 games, unsurprisingly. Rimatu 1. Procrasti lost both his games, unsurprisingly as well. Envas also had a really poor performance. He only won 1 out of his 4 games, which is unfortunate because I think he's a pretty good player still. And then Nausea, despite being drafted in like round 4 to 6, somewhere around there, she only got given 2 games, which is interesting. Maybe there was some issues with timing on her end or something. She couldn't make it, but you'd expect she'd have way more games than that, considering she was drafted so early. Gabe did decently. Anoki also sort of flopped. He only won an entire 1 point out of 4 games. Now, Chopin did amazingly this tournament. He went 5 for 5, winning 18 points. He had a great performance. And then you have Claire and Acro with actually pretty good performances. They both only had 4 games instead of the usual 5, which you'd expect captains to have. But, they won a lot of games. You see there, they got a lot of points for their team. And them top 3 were really carrying the team, so it's unfortunate because if they had some better later drafts, they could probably have been in a really good position, because Acro and Claire and actually Chopin did a really good performance. They were all pretty strong this tourney. And now you see an interesting thing in Strom's team. He only gave himself 1 game, so that's also kind of interesting because he's a captain, right? He can play 5 games, but he's only using 1, and then even his vice captain only had 4 games. Now, I think this is interesting because it's sort of like misusing or not taking advantage of the fact that the captains are the only players that can have, and vice captains, the only people that can have 5 games. You really want to be taking advantage of this, because if you don't, well, you don't win the tournament. That's what happened with their team. So I had no idea what happened here. Again, maybe it's just timing, or maybe Strom just wanted to be the Mr. Nice guy and give all his players 3 games or 2 games, which looks to be what happened. So that was an interesting decision. Didn't work by the looks of it, but his team didn't do badly at all. So I guess each to their own. Bremen had a good tourney performance. Strom, I wouldn't know how well they did because they only played one game and won it. Ashley didn't do too well. Awesomeness did decently. And you have people like Blitzkrieg, I've never even heard of, who've gone 2 for 3, so they obviously did alright. Fat Midget, decent player. Left Winger, decent player. Both did decently. And then you have Maxi and Morientes, who are both good players, and they actually quite flopped this tournament, only getting 1 win out of 4 games. Again, my decent player, getting decent points. Salt and Limes and Professor Rees. I'm not too familiar with these guys. I know Salt and Limes is alright, and they both didn't do too well, I guess. Sidewalk Hill, I think they play other games that aren't Secret Hitler, so they should be doing decently, which they did. Tyrox did well. Grizz didn't, by the looks of it. Apparently they must have won a special game, though. That's interesting. And then you move on to Medusa's team, which has a stark contrast to the rest of the board, in which they have 2 of their players with over 20 points. Look at Medusa and Andrew going 5 for 5, winning all of their games, and they obviously both got the MVP. They had 2 of their players on their team being both 1 and 2 over there. So they just really did an amazing performance with, having Medusa and Andrew sort of completely carry the team, but I wouldn't even say they carried because the rest of the team scored some really good points, as you can see here. Warlock, Div and Beyond scored really high as well. So yeah, you have Andrew and Medusa just doing amazingly. Div overperformed this tourney, he did well. I've no idea who this guy is, or this guy, but they just did, whatever. Beyond did alright. He did much better than his last tournament, at least that's for sure. Jimmy did not do well, actually. He flopped this tournament by the looks of it. Again, I had no idea why this guy got 4 games. He should really be getting like 3 or 2. He's not actually a 2K player despite having 2K. So it's interesting that he got 4 games. Or she, I have no idea who they are. And only won 1. So they didn't do well this tourney. Paladin got 4 games as well, which is also interesting. But he actually did decently. So, you can't bash it. Kashi got 2 games, did alright. Lame God got 3 games, did good. Olk only got given 1 game despite being also drafted really high up. He's quite a strong player. Again, maybe some timing issues going on there. Amami got 2 games. He lost most of them. I think he mostly got put in silent games, and he did have some unfortunate games by the looks of it. So can't really blame him for them, but I don't think. Warlock again overperformed this tournament. It's actually really interesting to see that he only got given 3 games despite such an amazing performance. Every one of the games he was in, he played really well. So I'd have given him 4 games definitely. But yeah, he did get really good points regardless. And then you move on to Manu's team, where you see quite a lot of 1s, quite a lot of maxed, and then quite a lot of 3s. Manu himself, I'm not sure if he actually got 1 less game because of this deduction, but what's interesting is at the very start of the tourney he said, we have a lot of players that are likely to get deductions and stuff. If any of our players get deductions, I'll double them. So if you lose 1 game, I'll make you lose 2 games. And then ironically, he's the only person on the team to get a deduction, which I think is quite funny. So yeah, Manu, either by choice or because of that deduction, only played 4 of 5 games. He did average. Lying Lizard, which is Tom, had some unfortunate games. He really flopped this tourney. Dave, I've not really any idea who Dave is, or Juicer, but they both lost the games. Electron did amazingly this tournament. He went 3 for 3. Geols got 3 games. He pretty much begged for his 3rd game after only getting 2 and losing them both, but he did end up winning his 3rd, so that was decent. Insurgents, I have no idea who he is. He lost his game. Lyra, again, I have not really any idea who she is. She apparently won one of her 3 silent games. Now Liliana got 3 games, which again, I don't know how to say this without sounding mean or anything, but Liliana is like a 15-50 player and getting given 3 games when she really should only be given 1. Like back in 2 tourneys ago, I was an 1800 player. I ended up getting 1 game in total, and then there's 15-50s getting like 3 games. It's just not really great team management, in my opinion. Them games would have definitely been better used on someone like Vincer, who only got 3 games instead of 4, despite being a really strong player. That's interesting. Pepsi went decently. He won half of his games. I also just did decently, only winning half my games. Perry completely flopped. Again, it's considering he got drafted in like round 5. You'd expect better from him. He only got us 3 points. Sale, again, sort of carrying this team. He won most of his games, getting some really good points there. So good job to Sale. And then Vincer should really have gotten another game, so he could have got more points because he was doing well this tourney. Shoefly also was doing well. Interesting. And they move on to Pingu's team, where, again, the vice captain and captain, both strong players, and they both did alright. Better than alright by the looks of it. So, yeah, then Benjamin, by the looks of it, completely flopped this tourney. He won none of his games, so that's unfortunate. Fire Cub did alright or something, I don't know. Joyner Lucas did about as expected. I don't know why he got 4 games. I'd have given him 3 at most. Joe Schmo also, interesting that he got 4 games. Again, he should really have 3 at most, but he did get good points, so he did well this tourney. Junkrat lost his only game. Again, I have no idea who these 2 really are, but they didn't do good by the looks of it. Monty Jaffa did well. He won 3 out of 4 games. Nixon did alright. No idea who these 2 are. Shiro did alright. And then again, in yet another tourney, Yules has had a really unfortunate performance, only winning 1 out of 4 games. So what's going to be interesting to see next draft is if Yules ends up getting drafted even lower than round 6 because of this. Or if Yules even plays the next tourney. You know, she's been having really bad luck, so you never know. And then we move on to the final team, which is Vice's team. So Vice himself did well. He got 16 points, that's good. And by the looks of it, Artsy also did really well. Yeah, I just realised he gave himself 6 games. That's interesting. He's the only person in the entire tourney. Oh no, I was wrong. I didn't see Pingu did. Yeah, Pingu and Vice, the only people who had 6 games ever, which is interesting. And they both did well, winning 2 out of 3 of the games. 2/3 of the games, I mean. Billy underperformed this tournament. You should probably expect better things from when he's vice captain, but he didn't do too badly, I guess. Again, I don't really know these people very much. Artsy did really well. Don't really know these guys very well. They did not good by the looks of it. Calvin did alright. He should have played some voice chat games, but I don't think he was there in the correct times, so that would have been interesting to see, because I'm pretty sure he's a good voice call game player. Darkies did not too well. He flopped. DMC also didn't do too well. He had some really unfortunate silent games, which he's usually good at, where he got some really stupid teammates, basically. Akan actually did really well, winning 3 out of 4 of the games. Reich also did really well. Schlobby did decently, and then Scorcher basically just flopped, which is interesting because he was a 2nd round pick. You expect better from him. But obviously I've no idea what happened in these games as well. I'm sorry if I'm said. So you flopped or something in this video and you've had some unwinnable games or something. I have no idea. And then you have Woody, who was drafted, I think, by Manu in like round 7 or something. And then ended up getting swapped for Dave, who was like a round 9 draft. And then Dave performed better than Woody has, as far as I know. Woody only got 1 game. You actually see an interesting thing on this team, which is they have a lot of people with 1. And then everyone else has 4 or more, besides the 1-3. which is not a very, it's not a very nice way of drafting, but not a very nice way of giving the games out, I mean, but it definitely does the job considering they got second. Right, so that's pretty much everybody's individual performance. Now let's go look at the interesting start that Jeb's team had, where they were winning most of these games up to about here, or even up to here, you could say. They were winning the majority of the games. They had a really strong performance. They were like up in first, I think, by the half point of the game. Even until here, I think they were still in first. Possibly even here, I can't remember. But yeah, they had a really good start, and then and you just see the other half of the game, they just didn't do anywhere near as well, and they ended up coming in last despite that great start. Well, maybe there's some sort of correlation between the best players being put in first or something. Nope, Jeb's is spread out. No, they're actually all spread out, which just means they must have got really unlucky in the second half, or really lucky in the first half. Again, you go to Acros Team. They just had a really, really bad start. Contrast to Jeb's team. They lost the majority of the games until here, and then the second half they turned it around, winning a lot more than they lost in the second half, but still losing quite a lot more than you'd want to. And then Strom's team, I'm not sure where they ended up. They ended up in fourth, so they did decently. Oh, what was that? Okay, yeah, they just had a pretty spread out performance where they did alright through most of the tourney. And then Medusa's team, you should just see a lot of greens throughout, yeah. Especially in the second half. Look at all them greens. They won the majority of the games they played there. They've only got like 4 losses out of all of these days. That's insane. They did really well in the second half. And you see on Manu's team again, up until like here, we didn't have a particularly good performance. And then after here, we turned it around, I guess. Ended up coming third. That's good. And Pingu's team again, really spread out, but quite an unfortunate tourney from him because he should have been much higher in the rankings because he had a pretty strong team. And then finally we have Vice's team, who again just consistently performed well throughout the tourney. So yeah, that's through all the teams and stuff. So yeah, so we're going to go over to where is it? There we go, personal scores again. And I'm just going to briefly talk about, team management and captains and stuff. So what's interesting to see is, again, I spoke about it in this video already, Strom only got 1 game. That's really a misuse of his potential 5 games that he could have had. You see a lot of the captains only playing 4 games this tourney when they really should have been playing 5. You really want to maximise the games going to the better players who can score more points in this tourney. So when you see wasted potential like this, it's quite unfortunate because they could have probably scored much higher if they hadn't have done that. And again, as I've already mentioned, you see the 2 weakest drafted teams ended up coming in the end, which shows there is very much an importance about the draft in this game. You really want to have a stronger draft, so hopefully the next captains for the next tourney think about that and take that into account. Jeb's strategy of drafting active people clearly doesn't work very well when the active people aren't that good. Sorry, that sounded mean. So interesting things. Some very interesting things. And then the final thing I want to talk about is the captains themselves. So I think Strom is probably the second weakest player. I'm not too sure if Strom's hit 2k. Strom's been playing way longer than me. I think Strom probably has hit 2k at some points, but I don't think they are a 2k player. I think Strom's probably about 1900 maybe. Again, I might not be wrong, but so Strom was probably the second weakest captain, which, I mean, obviously hasn't affected the team much since he only got 1 game, so I guess you can't really complain about that. But My main problem comes with Jeb, and I'm good friends with Jeb, so it's sort of I don't know how to say this without being a dick, but I don't think Jeb deserved to be a captain this tourney. Right? Like the only reason he won was because he has sort of this not like actual cult, but like he has sort of like a cult following. He has a lot of friends on this site. He has a lot of sort of greens that like him, to put it bluntly. He has a very big presence on the Discord. So basically, he just has this community that will. So much so that it was pretty obvious to predict he would end up being captain, despite being, unlike everyone else, nowhere near a 2K player. So, I personally think that it's quite selfish to put yourself as a captain if you are not a 2K player, or at least near a 2K player, because you are immediately putting yourself at a disadvantage, and you're putting your team at a disadvantage, is what I mean. I guess that the word used to sum up this entire, him being captain, is really just selfish. He's put himself in for 5 games and nobody can stop him. He has the power to do whatever he wants when he's captain. And I think sort of he should really realise the fact that he is not one of the stronger players on his team. He shouldn't be having 5 games in my opinion. But again, he's the captain, no one can tell him otherwise. So, I mean, it didn't work by the looks of it. Because basically what I'd like to say is, if you have a draft, right, and you have immediately you've got 2K plus players as the captains, that basically just counts as the 2K players. You've got one 2K player on your team to start off with. Whereas you have like Jeb, who's probably like an 1800 player, he's a captain. Well, you're immediately at a significant disadvantage. It's the equivalent of, you get the first draft of the game and you decide to pick fucking Perry or someone. You just wouldn't see it, because it's just, it's not, I don't know. If you wouldn't draft somebody that high, then you shouldn't be captain, right? I don't know how else to say that. If you're not going to, and if you would not be in the first like 2 or 3 rounds, you probably should not be a captain. So I think that should be a lesson in future, because we do have a lot of people signing up for captain, and the majority of them are not 2K players. I do genuinely believe you should only sign up for captain if you are at least near a 2K player in terms of skill level, not in terms of actual elo, because elo doesn't really mean much. So I hope this sort of is a lesson to learn. Maybe if Jeb does sign up again, wins again, I guess the solution is just to give himself less games, because it's kind of selfish to give himself that many when he has, people who are better than him, like one-on-one, getting 2 games. So hopefully, there's lessons to be learnt there. And final thing I want to talk about is, ironically, the toxicity in the tournament. I think that's quite funny for me to say, considering I've been spending most of this video bashing on certain people. But there is a lot of toxicity in this tournament. There has been lots of announcements and stuff about it, and it is quite unfortunate to see. Now, I have myself made some long post about it. Let me see if I can find it. What was it in? There we go. Let's bring this up. So I did make a long copy pasta, sort of as a meme, sort of being serious, just because everyone was posting copy pastas. So I just made this. I think it's mostly true, but I was also sort of saying this in a joking way. I do think negative reinforcement works well on this site, and I don't think emotionally sensitive people should be on this site, because the site in general is quite toxic, and there's no sort of turning that down without excessively punishing people. Like, there's no way of removing the toxicity from this site without significantly increasing the rules and stuff. So I do think that some of the flame that people get after the game, especially when they're in tournament games and you do incredibly badly at the game, you should have people telling you in the end, wow, you really threw that game. But what doesn't need to be happening is, apparently some people have been actually harassing people after the games, like spam DMing them shit and fucking full on flaming them and stuff. It's like, that's obviously not necessary and it's obviously bad. But I think also at the end, the point's completely correct. If you get lots of people at the end of the game all telling you you're in the wrong, telling you did really badly, you will do everything possible to improve at the game so that you don't have to go through that experience again. I think that is quite true because it's obviously worked for me. I obviously wasn't this amazing player as soon as I started the game. Every time I make a mistake, I get flamed. I get people being toxic to me. So I don't really see why it should be different for other people. Now, obviously, it's in this tourney environment, so you do have everything sort of amplified more than a normal game. Instead of at the end of the game, you have 3 people telling you, wow, you did really shit that game. You have 20 to 50 people telling you, holy shit, you're really bad at the game. It's a bit of a difference, so it is seriously overwhelming. And I would not be surprised at all if some people did not play the next tourney because of it, which is quite unfortunate. But I do still stand by the fact that there is some sort of flame necessary, because it just doesn't work if you try and gently tell people they did something wrong. They just don't listen. The average person just doesn't. I'll tell you this firsthand, because when I made mistakes 6 or 7 months ago, I had a player message me asking me, genuinely trying to give me help and advice on how to be better at the game. And obviously I was just at the time like, nah, fuck you, I don't need help, I'm good at the game, I can hold my own. So I just completely ignored them. And I think that's the sort of attitude that most people on the site have, especially if you are one of the many inflated people on the site, like I once was. Back when I was hitting 2k, I was like, I had the mindset of, oh, I have hit 2k, therefore I must be a 2k player, which in hindsight is really stupid. You have so many boosted players on the site that it's really hard to see sometimes sort of where you actually should be. So yeah, I'd just like to, especially if you are one of them inflated players, you are not going to listen to other people's advice because you're going to think you're hot shit. So I would say significantly tone down the toxicity in the next tournament, but the flaming at the end of the game when people make a mistake is, I genuinely think, a good way of making people be better. I'd like to hear your opinions on this in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with me. This is the first video that I've made like this. I potentially will be making videos next tournament, and I will potentially be making lots of videos on Secret Hitler in the future. I also plan on making some full-on video guides on how to play Secret Hitler, because I do feel like there is a complete lack of them on the site. I don't think there are any videos actually on it. There is Iconic's guide, but that's all in paper form. Nobody has the time to read for half an hour. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like. If you significantly disagree with my opinions and hate me, be sure to leave a dislike. And that's it for this video. Goodbye.